Hi, today's video is all about one of the OG anamorphics, the Sirui 50mm f1.8 for Super 35 sensors. This is one of the cheaper anamorphics that came out a few years back and started a revolution of cheaper and cheaper anamorphics. So until this came out, a couple of other anamorphics, you had to spend a lot of money to get an anamorphic look, unless you got an adapter which went on the front of a lens, but then you had to focus both the lens and the adapter on the front, unless you spent a lot of money on cinema grade anamorphics, probably 10-15,000. So this created a bit of a revolution, and there's now lots and lots of different anamorphics coming out from lots of different companies such as Blazar. I've covered the anamorphic adapter from Samyang. I've also looked a little bit at this lens, especially the adapter for the Sirui anamorphics. You now have the full frame version of these as well as other lenses, and there's more and more, it seems, every week coming out. I haven't even scratched the surface, which I think is a great thing. It's really nice that all these different lenses are coming out now. But I thought I'd go back 4 years and look at this, the OG anamorphic that came out, and why it's still a great way to get into anamorphics, a cheaper way to get into anamorphics, and a very nice option for the beginner or even the pro. I've got some really nice examples of images from this. So this came out around 2019, quite a revelation when it did come out. You had this as one of the first major Chinese brands bringing out anamorphics. Sirui up to that point was more known for tripods and stands and so on. So for around $1,000 US, you had this, and you had the Vazen 40mm T2. That lens was for micro four thirds, where this was for Super 35 and still is for Super 35. Though I have used it on full frame and I will give some examples of that. It doesn't quite fit the full image of full frame, but you can crop in a little bit. For example, on my Sony camera, once I activate active stabilization, it will crop in a bit. Crop it a little bit more and you've pretty much covered the Super 35 sensor. A lot of cameras you can also go to Super 35 mode or APS-C mode, and that will crop in as well. Or of course, if you've got an APS-C camera, this is perfect. So a little bit about the build quality of this. Even though it's one of the first cheap Chinese made anamorphic lenses, it's really well made. It's very metal feel to it. The focus ring is really nice with hard stops. You can hear the click there. And the aperture ring, even though it's a little bit tighter, still feels good. And I prefer the tightness because it stops you hitting by accident. That goes from T1.8 or F1.8 as it says on the lens. It also says T on the aperture ring to T16. And it has 10 iris blades. It gives it a very smooth overlook, and you can also see the blue tint there, which hints to the blue flares it has. It has a 67mm front screw mount, so you can add different ND filters or even diopters, and diopters are important for anamorphic lenses because it means you get extra close focus. The close focus is never good on anamorphic lenses, though I think that will change in the near future. It seems to be more and more things are getting better and better. So it's got a 1.33 squeeze factor, which works very well on 16.9 sensors such as the Sony I'm using now. In fact, most such as Canon and so on will have that. But apart from Panasonic and Blackmagic, who do the full readout of the sensor, which means once you do stretch out the image, you can use wider anamorphics such as 2x or 1.5 and use the whole image of the sensor, where on cameras such as Sony or Canon or Nikon, then you will, once you de-stretch it, have to cut a little bit off the edges. But on a 1.33 anamorphic lens like this is more made for it, so you can actually use it almost to the edges for a cinema scope look. So I'm going to talk about the positives and negatives of this lens and go over it. I've been using it for 4 years now, so I've got a pretty good idea of how it works. First negative is anamorphic mumps. Anamorphic mumps is when the squeeze factor is different close up rather than at affinity. This lens has a 133 squeeze at affinity, and at close up it's 127. At close focus at 133, the face would actually look fatter and give the look of having mumps, hence the term anamorphic mumps. You can see at this point here where I'm focusing close and far away outside St Paul's Cathedral, and you can see where the building seems to get fatter and a little bit thinner when I focus in and out. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with this. If you're doing a standard squeeze of 1.33, when you are close focusing, things do get a little bit wider. Unfortunately, that's a common trait in many anamorphics, but not all. If you've got a fat face like mine, that's going to make you look even worse. In fact, some actors in the 50s and 60s signed contracts saying they wouldn't use certain lenses because it made their face look fat. Kind of like focus breathing, but with a stretch. It's probably the best way to put it. But they call it mumps because it makes your face look fatter, like having mumps. So anamorphic mumps is one negative from this. I think the new Blazer ones avoid this. If that's so, that'd be very good. I'm going to have to pick one of those up, try it and test it against some of my other anamorphic lenses. Even though it sounds like a big deal, it's not really. You can get by with most of it. My next negative point is it can be very clinical. So it can be very sharp. In fact, for some people, it's a little bit too sharp. For me, I think it's great. It's a different look from other anamorphics where they might be very big amounts of fall off. You get that waterfall bokeh, which you do slightly on this, but not quite as much. So this can be better for an anamorphic slight look, but more clinical look as well. Better for somewhere between a full-on anamorphic or your normal photo lens that can be used for video, that kind of thing. So if you've got a standard lens and you've got your anamorphic on one side, this is somewhere in the middle of the look. You don't want quite too full-on anamorphic. This lens is perfect for that middle ground. So I do think it has its place, but for some people it's too sharp because they want that super anamorphic look. I've had the 35mm, use 24mm, and you've got a 75mm as well. They don't quite match up. This one seems to be a bit more warmer than the other ones. Another problem people find with this lens is the over-the-top flares. It's got amazing flares. You get this lovely blue flare go across the screen, but it can be a little bit too much for some people. Some people prefer a more cut down, lower key kind of flare. If you want your big blue sci-fi anamorphic flares, this is the lens for you, but it's not for everybody, unfortunately. For me, I don't mind it, but sometimes I did actually find it went a little bit over the top. I remember doing a Christmas fair a few years ago and everywhere I got blue streaks. If you don't mind the blue streaks, then this is the lens for you. But it can go a little bit over the top compared to other anamorphics. And another thing people don't like about this is it is only a 1.33 squeeze. As I said before, it is very good for putting over 16.9 sensors, but some people want that bigger squeeze, and then you get the more oval bokeh that you get on anamorphics. I don't think the oval bokeh is too bad on this, but some people like it a little more pronounced. To be honest, the average viewer's not going to notice the difference. It's only really if you're looking for it. Okay, the positives of this lens. It can be sharp. So I did that as a negative, but it's also a positive. If you want that nice in-between look between a normal lens and you want something a little bit sharper, then this lens can be perfect for that. It's a little bit sharper, it's nicer, and it adds a different kind of look from some of the other anamorphic lenses. I'd say it's that good in-between ground, as I said before. So it is sharper, but that can be a good thing. It's super cheap, but it's got a very pleasing image. It's got a very nice image. And for the price, you get something that's very well built. It's metal construction. It feels nice. It's missing the teeth. So if you do use a follow focus, but you can add them later anyway, it's not a big deal. It's super well built. It feels premium. And it's very small and light as well, which I think is very handy. If I want to run and gun it or go out somewhere and film something, this is nice and light. I used it in Japan in a couple of situations where I didn't want to bring out something heavy, and I got that nice through the boats and so on in the harbour, and that was because this is so light. It made me want to bring this rather than some of my other lenses. It's got those super blue strong flares for that sci-fi look. Some people absolutely adore that, so actually that is a positive for some people. It's a great entry for anamorphic because it's only a 1.33 squeeze. It's a great thing for someone who wants the slight look but they don't want to push it too far. That's where I think this is still a very solid lens, especially if you're on a Super 35 camera or you don't mind cropping in a little bit. And to be honest, most movies are filmed as Super 35 anyway. So that's my look at a 4-year-old lens, but I want to have a look at it because there's so much coming out about anamorphics, especially with the new Blazer sets coming out. People are really getting more and more into it, and I just want to have a look back at the OG lens that started this whole craze really. This and the Visor, but these ones are still going. People still talk about Sirui as a major player. So I just want to bring this out again. They've also just brought out a 40mm that has autofocus. I haven't tried it, but I'd be interested to try it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope to see you again in my next one. Thank you. Bye bye.